3 days after the earthquake hit, the bank was busted. It was bankrupt, and it was Leeson's fault.
Greed, conspiracies, and lies. These companies are guilty of them all.
Martha Stewart was indicted on criminal charges relating to an insider trading scandal that began more than a year ago.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 corporate scandals.
He'd been bankrupt, he'd been sort of living out of the trunk of his car. He was the kind of guy who was always talking up a story.
For this list, we're taking a look at sensational controversies involving huge names from the business world, all of which have had wide-ranging consequences affecting companies and normal people alike.
What began as an industrial accident hundreds of miles away could have such an impact on us. The crude crisis began on the evening of April 20th, 2010.
We've based our choices on a combination of the money involved, how high-profile the individuals and companies are, the impact of the scandals on others and their overall size, as well as whether any jail time was given out.
I work on the trading floor. Yeah.
What's the mood like in there?
Oh, terrible. Death. It's like a massive earthquake.
Number 10. Bre-X gold mining scandal.
Surely one of the biggest frauds in the history of the world, probably the biggest mining fraud of all time.
The mining arm of this Canadian company shot to prominence in 1995 when it claimed it had discovered a huge gold store in Indonesia. The resulting increase in stock price saw Bre-X Minerals Limited make over $6 billion in Canadian dollars. But the bottom line was that it was all based on a lie perpetrated by geologist Michael de Guzman. The fraud came to light when de Guzman killed himself by jumping from a helicopter.
Takes off over the jungle. He's about 400 or 500 feet in the air over some of the deepest rainforest in all of Indonesia. And the pilot looked into the back seat and de Guzman was gone.
Further analysis of the mining site revealed there to be insignificant amounts of gold, which ultimately sent the company into bankruptcy. Although little money was recovered for those who were misled, the scandal did result in significant changes to Canadian legislation with respect to professional geology.
It would be somewhat more difficult to pull off a similar type of scam, but it isn't impossible. It's probably still could be done again.
Number 9. IBM and the Nazis.
During World War II, IBM played an integral role in carrying out the Holocaust in Poland.
It's well known that many companies form questionable allegiances in the interest of business.
Hi, I'm Jared the Subway Guy, and this is my story.
But aiding the Third Reich in the systematic identification and genocide of millions of people is a crime many would label unforgivable.
The punch cards, by the millions, had to be printed, and they were printed exclusively by IBM, and the profits were recovered just after the war.
The German subsidiary of the company allegedly provided punch cards to quickly analyze the ethnic backgrounds of the populations of countries the Nazis occupied to determine who should be imprisoned or killed in a concentration camp. The company has never openly admitted direct involvement with the Nazi regime, but this remains a black mark on one of the biggest corporations in the United States.
The fact that they have used equipment, that is a fact. But how they got it, how much cooperation they got, and any kind of collusion trying to connect dots that are not connected, I think that's the part that is discredited.
Number 8. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
A massive oil slick now covering some 600 square miles of the Gulf of Mexico, and it could start reaching the United States coast within hours.
The major oil company known as BP may already have had a famously poor environmental record, but this disaster was the worst in the history of the petroleum industry. 11 people were killed in the initial explosion of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. But humans and animals continue to feel the detrimental effects of 210 million U.S. gallons of oil flowing into the sea.
If this thing would have been a mistake, I could live with that. But this wasn't a mistake. It was just pure greed.
The company was hit with charges that amounted to $18.7 billion in fines for their gross negligence and willful conduct. However, whether this amount of money is capable of reversing the environmental damage remains to be seen.
Our accidental drilling spill again in the Gulf is a tragedy that should have never happened. And to all those affected, I want to say, we are deeply sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry.
Number 7. The Lehman Brothers bankruptcy.
Stocks all around the world are tanking because of the crisis on Wall Street.
The 2008 financial crisis was a tough time for reckless investment banks, as Bear Stearns found out. But the Lehman Brothers collapse was the economic event's greatest victim.
Hi, sorry, do you work for Lehman? Yeah, I do, but... And how do you feel about all this happening? Very upset.
The financial services firm's leveraging of borrowed money caused the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history in 2008, and the company fizzled out of existence in a rapid decline that enhanced the economic devastation of the ongoing crisis.
So you've been able to pocket close to $500,000, and my question to you is, a lot of people ask, is that fair for the CEO of a company that's now bankrupt to have made that kind of money? It's just unimaginable to so many people.
News emerged that executives increased their pay just before the bankruptcy, and that accounts had been altered to hide the bank's poor financial position. This case stands as the perfect example of the culture of excess causing worldwide suffering for billions of people.
This report comes just short of suggesting this is by no means an accident, but instead one of the greatest crimes ever perpetrated against a group of people. This crime, an accounting fraud perpetrated by bank CEOs against the American taxpayer and enabled by the U.S. government.
Number 6, Tyco international theft.
There are murderers out there who have spent less time in prison than Dennis Kozlowski has spent in time.
Absolutely true. I've met him.
Dennis Kozlowski and Mark H. Swartz were infamous for their extravagant lifestyles that were built through the success of the security systems company known as Tyco International Limited. And in 2002, they were accused of stealing over $150 million from the business. The then CEO and then CFO contended that the board had authorized these payments as bonuses. The following trial was something of a sham, but eventually both men were sentenced to up to 25 years in prison during a retrial. Due to the duo's falsification of records, Tyco was forced to pay almost $3 billion to defrauded and likely very angry investors.
I earn 90 cents a day now. So on a good week, I make about $4.50 a week.
Number 5. The Bhopal disaster. The death toll of this 1984 disaster in India is claimed to be more than 16,000, but it's unknown how many people actually suffered as a result of the gas leak at the Union Carbide Indian Limited pesticide plant. Former Union Carbide Corporation CEO Warren Anderson was charged with manslaughter by Bhopal authorities, but never had to answer for the disaster as the U.S. refused to extradite him. In 1989, $470 million was paid by UCC to settle litigation, but a lawsuit seeking further compensation for crimes against humanity was dismissed in 2012. Anderson died 2 years later, with the Indian public still feeling as though justice had not been served.
There was a number of safeguards that could have been and should have been in place, but they were not.
Number 4, the FIFA corruption case.
Allegations of systematic corruption and bribery over the last over 2 decades, relating to all of the major, or many of the major football tournaments.
The governing body for the most popular sport in the world has been dogged by constant accusations of corruption. But in 2015, these suspicions were confirmed. 18 individuals were indicted on charges including money laundering and wire fraud.
I don't know what I'm more surprised by, that FIFA officials were actually arrested or that America was behind it. It took the country that cares the least about football to bring down the people who have been ruining it.
There is considerable evidence that bribery of top officials has been key in deciding where major tournaments like the World Cup are held.
The 2010 FIFA World Cup will be organized in South Africa.
As of the end of 2015, the whole organization was still in turmoil as further accusations of corruption emerged regarding suspended President Sepp Blatter.
Here we go, Sepp.
Number 3, WorldCom accounting fraud.
WorldCom Incorporated executives Scott D. Sullivan and David F. Myers were charged with 7 counts of securities fraud.
This telecommunication corporation held the record for biggest bankruptcy in 2002, before the Lehman Brothers collapse took its unwanted title 6 years later. Throughout the early 2000s, the company was utilizing a complex scheme of adjusting its books to hide the considerable losses.
Although I would like, more than you know, to answer the questions that you and your colleagues have about WorldCom, I've been instructed by my counsel not to testify based on my Fifth Amendment constitutional rights.
By 2003, it's thought that their total assets had been fraudulently inflated by around $11 billion. In 2005, former CEO Bernard Ebbers was convicted of various types of fraud that would keep him behind bars for 25 years, a sentence many would say was befitting someone who deceived so many.
Hopefully, it will deter people from hurting investors, former employees like myself, who basically have little or no recourse except for a class action lawsuit.
Number 2, the Volkswagen emissions scandal.
And in my German words, we've totally screwed up.
In this case of fraud, it was discovered that one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world was using software to falsify emission test results, with an estimated 11 million of its vehicles being affected. While the findings by the International Council on Clean Transportation may end up costing the company more than $18 billion in fines, what should also be considered is the fact that Volkswagen's reputation in the eyes of the consumer could be irreparably damaged. As well as substantial financial consequences, the company could be responsible for deaths due to fumes that they had fraudulently stopped from appearing in tests.
I don't think the company itself will fail, but the company will suffer a lot as a result of what's happened.
Before we reveal our top pick, let's take a look at some dishonorable mentions.
Barclays are not alone in this. The FSA is continuing to investigate the conduct of a number of other banks in relation to LIBOR.
We talked about apologies. And I told you that I owe a lot of people apologies.
73 anni, provato dalla malattia, l'ex patron della Parmalat oggi non era in aula, ma agli arresti nell'ospedale di Parma.
Peter Luscher has to investigate over €1 billion in bribes that were paid out before he came to Siemens.
Number 1, the Enron Scandal.
The fatal flaw at Enron was pride, arrogance, intolerance.
All that money you guys stole from those poor grandmothers?
In the space of a month or so, this energy giant went from being one of the biggest companies in the world to bankrupt.
Our position as to whether Arthur Andersen committed a crime has not changed. They did not. Not a single person there did.
What set the scandal apart from the relatively common instances of accounting fraud were the failures of accounting firm Arthur Andersen LLP, which neglected to report Enron's crimes and led to the firm's own dissolution. The sheer scale of Enron's fraudulent activity is difficult to comprehend, as it allowed the business to pretend it was running at $100 billion in revenues through the use of loopholes, poor financial reporting, and more to conceal its massive debt. Many critics thought that for an energy company to be so reckless was particularly abhorrent, and that those involved deserved their harsh sentences.
Ken Lay's resignation yesterday only escalates the situation.
Our hope is that we will not stop at resignations without dealing with some form of restitution to those that have been hurt.
Do you agree with our list? What do you think is the biggest corporate scandal? For more scandalous top 10s published every day, be sure to subscribe to WatchMojo.com.
We have changed our name from Beyond Petroleum to Dependable Petroleum. DP. We no longer f*** the earth, we DP it.